All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful afternoon. This is always the time of year where it's really hard to come inside in Coeur d'Alene. But this is a very important topic, and your being here today is one of the most important things that we can do in making sure that we have an impact on this issue. My name is Luke Malik. I am a lawyer here in town, have a law firm. I was lucky enough to represent this area in the state legislature for a while. But also, I was also very fortunate to work with the governor's office. The governor's office put together a task specifically to address fentanyl. And so I have a strong feeling about these issues, having seen what I saw while I was working on that task force with the governor. And I can tell you the folks you're going to hear from today are some of the most qualified to hear that you can hear from on this. And they're doing one of the most important things that governor's task force identified as being important to fighting this, which is education in the community. So you're going to hear things from them today that are going to shock you. And for those of you who haven't been touched by this, you'll have a good picture of how close to home this issue is touching so many people. And then you're going to have a task coming out of this, which is to go tell everybody what you've heard here today, because that's really what's going to make a difference out on the streets. So I am really excited to be here and thankful to the Chamber. Thank you, Linda, for pulling this all together, and thank you to our sponsors. We have Kootenai Health, NIC, and the Coeur d'Alene Chamber that have put this together, and really appreciative of that to them. There will also be a recording of this entire presentation that will be available online on the Chamber website after this is done. So as you're going out and doing the work of spreading the news about how dangerous this is and how we all have a place in fighting it, you'll have a resource that you can refer to there as well. So one other person I want to introduce is Tyrell Stevenson, who is going to be moderating this after they get started. But you're starting from my left, Sam Abramson with the Coeur d'Alene Tribe is going to be one of your speakers. And then John Kemp, who is retired from ISP and then now back in the battle, from what I understand. A good friend of mine and one of the most knowledgeable people I've known on this issue. And then we have Jeremy Heil with the Sheriff's Department here in Kootenai County. So appreciate you being here, Captain. And then Stanley Mortensen, our elected Kootenai County prosecutor, who I got to work with very briefly when I was a county prosecutor here in Kootenai, and very proud of the work that he's doing here. And then it's my honor to introduce my good friend Josh Hurwitz, who's going to take the podium after I leave here. He is our United States Attorney for the District of Idaho and has been working very hard on an issue that I'm not sure he's going to talk about today, but he is truly a man who understands the value of collaboration between the federal government and our locals, and making sure that we're empowering everything we can on this. So it's my honor to introduce Josh Hurwitz.
Thanks, Luke. Should I stay up here? All right, it's hard for me not to wander, so I'll try to stay relatively in one place. So thank you, Luke. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tyrell, for organizing this. I'm going to jump into this in a minute, but I wanted to just mention really two things. One is it's great to be here with many of our law enforcement partners. I say myself and my colleague Bryce Ellsworth. Bryce, would you stand up? Bryce is one of our assistant United States attorneys who works out of our Coeur d'Alene office. We have our main office in Boise where I live and spend most of my time, but we have an office in Coeur d'Alene dedicated to North Idaho. We also have an office over in Pocatello dedicated to Eastern Idaho. But Bryce is one of the prosecutors that has developed very significant expertise in fentanyl, and so I'm going to be relying on him throughout the day as we take questions. But I want you to know you're in good hands with Bryce and our other colleagues in Coeur d'Alene. We are the only two, I think, federal officials in this room, and that's, I think, both by design and also reflective of the partnerships that we have with tribal law enforcement, with state law enforcement, local law enforcement. This is not about any egos or jurisdictions or any turf wars. We don't see that in Idaho. This is about public safety for you and your loved ones in our community. So it's sort of an honor to be here representing my office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the federal government, but really that's just, who pays my paycheck. Our goal is to serve Idaho just like it is the goal of everyone you see up here. And the second thing I wanted to mention along those lines is it's National Police Week, a time that we recognize fallen officers throughout the country. And of course, in Idaho, we've had a recent loss with a deputy down in Ada County. So, I know that you all in this room would join me in thanking those that serve both in the past and presently. Very challenging times because of fentanyl and other issues, but I always want to take the chance to thank our law enforcement partners, especially during this week. Yes, thank you. So I thought I would start with a story. This on the screen is Michael Stabill. He was a Coeur d'Alene resident. I feel like I have his family's permission to tell you this story because they were part of a group of families that met with us and the DEA and the Governor's Office of Drug Policy to talk about some of the actual stories, not just the statistics, which we'll also get into, but to share real life stories from your community about why this is such a critical issue. So Michael, as you see, was 15 when he died of fentanyl poisoning. He was an engaged young person, not a drug user, in school, had a job. His father actually was planning to take him car shopping or truck shopping as it happens. But Michael, with a friend, made one bad decision. They went and sought out what they thought was a Percocet pill, a prescription drug, right, that's lawfully manufactured and lawfully prescribed. They obtained it from someone in Spokane, if I'm right about that, Bryce. Bryce has prosecuted the case. They bought 2 Percocet pills from this source. The first night, they broke the first pill in half, and they smoked it to ingest it. And, that was that. They went to sleep. The next morning, Michael's friend went off to work. Michael took the second pill that they had purchased, broke it in half, and smoked that, and passed away because that half pill contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. Michael's dad came home looking for him, planning to, again, take him out to get that truck to celebrate his first job, and Michael had passed away on the floor in his bedroom. And that's a story that is not unique. Unfortunately, sadly, it's something that we see on a regular basis, and we see it on a regular basis here in this part of the state. Bryce has prosecuted, I don't know, Bryce, 10, 12 cases, similar fact patterns. And so sadly, Bryce has become an expert in that type of prosecution. That's not really our focus today in terms of how we address it, although I hope we'll be able to answer some questions about it. What I wanted to do to start our conversation is talked about what fentanyl is and what it's doing to our community, using Michael as a sort of an emblem about why this is so important, because it could happen to any of our families. It has happened to people connected with folks in my office. So no one is immune, no matter where you live in the state, no matter your demographic background, no matter your socioeconomic background. This is something we all need to be aware of. So, as I said, Michael was a young boy. If you look at this statistic, the leading cause of death for individuals between 18 and 45 are opioid overdoses. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, and what we're talking about here is illicit fentanyl. This chart is maybe a little bit hard to see, but if that red line is clear to you, what it shows is an exponential growth in synthetic opioid deaths. And this only goes up to 2020, so it's probably even gone up even worse from there. So I saw a slide earlier that was rotating there that said this as well, but a lethal dose of fentanyl, and again, we're talking about illicit fentanyl, is minuscule, 2 milligrams, which would fit on this pencil tip, or is seen here, in contrast to a penny. So very, very tiny amounts of a incredibly potent substance can be deadly. What I wanted to do before we get to a discussion with our local partners here is give you a sense of the global nature of this problem. So I mentioned that we're talking about illicit fentanyl. Fentanyl itself is something that is produced by pharmaceutical companies and used in hospital settings, primarily in recoveries from surgery. There are little fentanyl patches that you might be aware of that anesthesiologists put on patients when they're undergoing a surgery, and it's very highly monitored and very carefully dosed. That's the pharmaceuticals fentanyl. What we're talking about is illicit fentanyl that comes to our country in a couple ways. It starts with precursor chemicals that primarily, as you can see from this map, are shipped over to the southern hemisphere, or to Mexico rather, in Latin America, from China and other countries in China, or by China. So East Asia, India has an issue with this as well, where there are essentially unregulated, corrupt at best, pharmaceutical companies that are producing this chemical and then selling it to bad actors in the cartels in Mexico. The cartels then take the precursor chemical and they manufacture it into this illicit fentanyl, which is then smuggled in pill and powder form across the border. So I mentioned that lawful fentanyl is produced by pharmaceutical companies. You can imagine what a pharmaceutical laboratory looks like. These are photos of what a cartel laboratory looks like in Mexico. So filthy, no quality control. I think hopefully these slides paint the picture for you. So like I said, they come in pill form and powder form, and let me focus on pill form first. These are images of an authentic oxycodone pill, and then a fake oxycodone pill that contains fentanyl. To me, it looks like the fake pill looks more legitimate, if you take a quick look at that. So it is really essentially impossible to tell whether you have obtained a legitimate prescription pill or a fake pill that contains fentanyl in it. And so that's really how the marketplace works on the pill side, is that the cartels manufacture fake pills that might look like an oxycodone, that may look like a Percocet, in the case of Michael Stable, but they actually contain fentanyl in unregulated amounts of fentanyl, inconsistent amounts of fentanyl. And what do I mean by inconsistent? Recent testing, this number just rose from 6 per 10 to 7 per 10, tested by the DEA, contain that lethal dose, potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. So it's a very, very risky illicit drug that is being sold in our communities, and especially to young people. So I mentioned there's also the powder side of the equation. Not all fentanyl users are seeking the counterfeit pills or the fake pills. Some are now addicted to fentanyl as fentanyl, and they're seeking just fentanyl any way they can get it. The cartels know this, and so they're moving powder as well as the fake pills into our country. We've also seen something called rainbow fentanyl. I don't know, Bryce, if you have something to add on this, but from my understanding, it's just a marketing device to make the pills look more interesting or maybe even more attractive to children. So there's not really any attempt to hide it. Fentanyl now is prevalent, and there's a market for it. People are addicted to it. People seek it out, and the cartels are supplying it because they're making billions and billions of dollars. Bryce, anything you'd add on that point?
No, I'd agree, and we've seen, I know Captain
Thank you. So we mentioned young people. Fentanyl is trafficked in a number of ways. A very scary way that it's trafficked is directly to individuals and to young people through social media. These are some examples of emojis that signify either fentanyl or fake prescription pills or other types of narcotics that we've seen in our cases nationwide when dealers are targeting young people and young people are seeking these illicit drugs. So that's a little bit about the sort of the nationwide and the global threat. I wanted to kind of drill down into what we're seeing in Idaho, which is really no different than what we're seeing nationwide. But here are the opioid death stats that we have most recently. You can see the bars are growing every year, sadly. I'm not sure the stats through 2024 so far, but 354 Idahoans that we know of that died of opioid overdoses or poisonings last year. In my estimation, this number is undercounted for a number of reasons. Sometimes there are other factors that might play into a death and that might get reported as the cause of death. Our coroner system is stretched very thin, and so I believe that these numbers are underreported based on some anecdotal evidence that we've seen. And I highlighted the word rate down here. It's not just the absolute number of deaths, but it's the rate of deaths that are associated with the use of this illicit fentanyl, meaning that the risks of harm or the risks of overdose and death are growing just as the absolute numbers are growing, if that makes sense. And that's because each of those pills or each of the quantities of powder contain more and more dangerous fentanyl. And Bryce and I were in a meeting yesterday where we heard that, based on some intelligence, that cartels are actually increasing the percentage of fentanyl in the pills and in the powder that they're shipping into the country, shipping, not lawfully, obviously. And I think that the reason for that is that they can try to get a higher price the more fentanyl they include in what they're producing and distributing. So there's a program that's federally funded called HIDA, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. Kootenai County is one of the counties that has this designation across Idaho. The Treasure Valley counties do as well, and then also I think it's Bannock County in East Idaho. And based on just the data from this program, so it doesn't include ISP seizures, it doesn't include DEA seizures, just HIDA seizures, you can see that the amount of fentanyl seized every year has gone up and continues to go up. That blue line shows the number of seizures. And what I think you can tell from this data is, on average, each seizure, say that 10 times fast, is involving more and more fentanyl as we get year on and year on. So the dealers are getting more of it, the traffickers are getting more of it, and that's reflected in these seizure statistics. All right, enough tongue twisters. Similar data for Kootenai County, right? If you look at this blue line, you'd say, oh, look, there's a dip in 2023, but that's not really the story. The story is the number of pills seized has gone up, even though the number of seizures sort of dropped down a little bit in 2023. Again, reflecting that the traffickers are having more and more of this. This is a very prevalent drug. It's easy to get. It's cheap to manufacture. Bryce or anyone else, what are the prices that we're seeing per pill in this area?
$5 a pill.
Yeah, kind of common. And if you get on to Montana, North Dakota, it goes up probably double, triple that, maybe even more when you think about some of the Native American reservations. So, $5 pill selling here at the border, about 5 cents I've heard, or 25 cents. So think about those margins. I mean, that's incredible profit for these cartels that are able to manufacture these drugs easily and get it across the border. It's starting to come over from Canada now, so it's not just a southern border problem. Our supply in North Idaho tends to come from Washington, Tri-Cities, or Spokane. So that's sort of what we're focusing our enforcement efforts on. So I'll just end by talking about sort of what we're doing at my office, and I think it dovetails really well with what I'm sure Stan will talk about with his efforts. We are aiming to take out not just the drugs, but the sources of supply, the networks that are bringing this illegal drug into our communities. So we're focused on dealers. Then we try to use the charges against them to essentially get them to cooperate against their sources of supply, which are usually out of state. And Bryce had a conversation with someone that we're prosecuting right now. Bryce, what did he say about Idaho?
He said it's a great place to be a family man, a bad place to be a drug dealer.
So that's despite the challenges that we face, that's reassuring to hear that our efforts are taking a toll on these drug trafficking organizations, and our goal, I'm sure it's shared with our partners, is to keep that statement true for those that would bring illicit fentanyl into our state. Again, this is a press release from our office a while ago talking about another really sad case involving a Sandpoint teen that passed away from fentanyl poisoning. Again, we're doing these cases. We don't want to have to do these cases, right? I wish that Bryce was not an expert in this area, but that's sort of the reality that we're facing. So I'll just conclude my remarks, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions. But it's not just just telling people what you hear, but really trying to make them understand that it's not somebody else's problem, right? It's not the community next door. It's not the family down the block that maybe has more disadvantage than your family. It's all of us. It's happened to really wealthy families. It's happened to really poor families. It's happened to really smart kids. It's happened to kids that were struggling. It's happened to people with substance abuse issues, and it's happened to people who just experimented one time and made a bad decision. So that's what I think the message that I hope you'll take with you from me at the end of the day. And thank you, Linda, again for this opportunity, and looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Josh. I think we had a couple of slides from John Kemp. Was there one more ad?
I can talk through it.
Okay, I misunderstood that. But yeah, following up with some of the remarks that he made about the education piece. And you can, we've got these chairs here. You can sit there if you're more comfortable, or stand, either way.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is John Kemp. Real quick, I retired in October from the Idaho State Police after serving 30 years. The vast majority of my career was spent in investigations and narcotics investigations specifically. One of the most impactful things that happened during my career was the death of Michael Stabill. When Michael died, it was the second teen in our community that had died from fentanyl poisoning, and myself and Lieutenant Jess Stennett, who works for the state police, runs the DEA task force here. We were literally sitting in a conference room. We said, we have to do something different. We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. And so we began to expand into the education piece of this, and we started the Idaho Fentanyl Education Project. And we spent a lot of time with some of our law enforcement partners and community partners, and anybody that would sit down and listen to what we had to say about fentanyl, we did a presentation at Post Falls High School early on. We had, aside from our family members, we had 3 people in the Post Falls High School auditorium, which holds, 500 people. And we just said, just stay. And we gave that presentation. One of them happened to be one of the vice principals, or the vice principal from the school, and he invited us back, and we went, and every single student in that school had to sit through an hour-long presentation, so we were pretty happy about that. Recently, I've been brought back by the Idaho State Police under a grant from Department of Education to coordinate or continue on really the Idaho Fentanyl Education Project. So I'm very excited about that. That's just come about in the last couple of weeks. I'm more than happy to come back, not have to be the captain or cop or any of that stuff, just can be a retired guy and get in front of people and really shine a light on this problem that we have going on in Idaho. A couple of things to dovetail on what Mr. Hurwood had to say. One of the questions that always comes up is why are we seeing this increase in fentanyl overdose deaths? We've seen a steady increase in this country, as that chart had showed, since about 2014, but really in Idaho since about 2017, it keeps climbing. We're now over 120,000 Americans have died last year, or excuse me, in 2022 from drug overdose, and most of those are fentanyl related. 122,000 people. It's astounding. We're at over 400, almost 400 people in Idaho alone. That's 400 families that are affected by this, and it's just incredible. Some of the things that are driving this increase in overdose is that now fentanyl is found in every street drug. So fentanyl is found in cocaine, fentanyl is found in methamphetamine, fentanyl is found in drugs that are very popular with our youth, such as MDMA or ecstasy or Molly as the kids call it, Xanax. These are the kids are buying fake Xanax bars, Xanny bars, that are actually fentanyl. They're the same as those blue 30 pills that we saw up there. Adderall. Very popular with young people ages 15 to about 24, and most of the Adderall that is on the street right now is pressed methamphetamine, and in some cases methamphetamine with fentanyl. And so people that have never used or even thought about using fentanyl, but they try dabble in cocaine or smoke meth or whatever, are actually getting fentanyl in their drugs. And the reason that this is happening is it's being done at what we call the retail level. So the cartels aren't mixing fentanyl in the cocaine that we've seen it at the border. Like, we're not seeing those seizures. What we're seeing is the cocaine dealt from the street. And cocaine is a central nervous system stimulant, and it is addictive. Methamphetamine, central nervous system stimulant, very addictive, but not as addictive as fentanyl. And so the economics of this, because anybody that deals drugs does it for one reason, which is what? Money, right? Money. And so if I can get Joey Muggaduts, who comes to me once a week for a couple of grams of coke, if I can mix in a little fentanyl, he's going to become addicted to this fentanyl without knowing it. He's just thinking he's getting really, really good cocaine. And instead of seeing him once a week, I'm going to see him 3 times a week. And then I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to see him 3 times a day, because that's how powerful this addiction is. And so that's why we're seeing fentanyl mixed in with some of these other drugs. And so it's one of those things. So the other thing that's really scary, and one of the reasons why we continue to see an increase in these overdose deaths, is because the price of fentanyl is very low and the supply is very high. It doesn't make any sense. This is economics 101. It should be supply low, price high, right? It's the opposite. When we started seeing fentanyl in Kootenai County, along about 2017 is when we started to see it, this transition from black tar heroin to these fentanyl pills. Those pills were $30 a piece. And so that price has slowly but surely come down, and now it's not uncommon, because those of them that are still cops and working in this drug world, they're buying, as undercovers, they're buying these drugs, and they're paying, on the high end, $5 per pill. If we buy in bulk, we're paying about $1.50 to $1.75 per pill. And so the price has just crashed. And when you think about this as a kid, it's harder for that 15 to 20-year-old kid to get a six-pack of beer and more expensive than it is to buy 10 fentanyl pills. And so this is sort of the economics of why we continue to see these deaths increase. Come on, turn. Anyway, so one of the other reasons why I'm here is to kind of talk about a little bit, Mr. Hurwitz talked about the DEA and the HIDTA task forces that we have around the state. This is kind of what law enforcement is doing. I'm not going to steal anybody else's thunder, but this prosecution of the drug dealers is something that is relatively new, and we've only been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. And I will tell you that these prosecutions have all been done on the federal side until recently. And I give all credit to Mr. Hurwitz and all of the prosecutors that work for him around the state, because this has been a huge game changer for us in Idaho to be able to charge these drug dealers, hold them responsible for the deaths that they have caused. And there's been a lot of prosecutions that have gone around the state, some of them very high profile, and so we're very thankful for that. We have spent a lot of time on education, as I told you, with the Fentanyl Education Project, getting in front of students. We're going to continue to do that. Town hall meetings very similar to this. We also do a specialized training for law enforcement and prosecutors. It's called Top Gun. We do it every year, and it is our students are both police officers and prosecutors, and it's a full contact training. The students go through a course where they are educated on fentanyl-related issues, on how to do these investigations, and the safety precautions, et cetera, that take place. And so that has been going on the last couple of years. That's paid for through HIDTA funds, and it's we get officers not only from Idaho but from around the country that are now coming to this, and prosecutors from around the country. Kootenai County has sent 2, 3 in the last couple of years. Mr. Ellsworth went through it first year, and he won our, we called it big hitter, because it is full contact. So the partnerships that we have with the prosecutors is just, you know, I can't stress to you how important it is. I have one more thing that I can't get my tablet to. Okay. The other thing that we've done in law enforcement is we've changed the way that we've done some things. A couple of years ago, we started the iLead program, which is the Idaho Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. And so we have provided the opportunity for people that are in the throes of addiction and they want help. And instead of taking them to jail, we will actually take them and get them into treatment. And that's a partnership that starts with our prosecutor's office. And again, Kootenai County Prosecutor's Office has been on board from day one with this. And one of the things that once this opportunity was presented to me when I was a district commander here, I just thought it was a great idea. People asked for help, and the only help that we could provide them was taking them to jail. And we wanted another opportunity. And quite honestly, I was a little concerned about how the troopers would respond to this, because it's really up to the troopers' discretion. But at the end of the day, most people that get involved in law enforcement, certainly the ones that stick beyond 5 years, are in it because they have a servant's heart and they want to help people. And this provided an opportunity for our troopers, our deputies, our patrolmen, to literally give people help that wanted it, and not taking them to jail, giving them the opportunity to go through and get involved in a treatment program. There's restrictions apply, if you will, and there's some parameters that go, but we have seen some success stories. We have had some graduations from this, and even if it saves one life, it just the impact that has on that person's family of not having to suffer the indignity of this poisoning and the loss, et cetera, has really been sort of a game changer. So with that, I will yield my time and be ready to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. really appreciate that. And we're going to want to hear more about things that we can do and more solutions and as we get farther into this. But, you know, we've talked about the global piece and how things move around and at the state level. Stan Mortenson's the prosecutor for Kootenai County and is the one responsible for dealing with this at the local level. Stan, can you talk about what you're seeing right here in Kootenai County and in Coeur d'Alene? And feel free to just grab the mic if you'd like.
Sure. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. I just want to apologize up front. If you saw me writing or checking my phone while I was up here, when I left my office, I grabbed the wrong piece of paper and I left my notes at my desk. I have been able to recreate my notes, but it's not in the same order it was in before. So if I seem kind of disjointed, that's what's going on. But so again, my name is Stanley Mortenson. I'm your prosecuting attorney. I have a unique background. I spent 8 years as a sheriff's deputy here in town before I went to law school. And so I have a unique perspective on things, I think. But as far as fentanyl goes, I can tell you that my office, we prosecute thousands of criminal cases every year, between 5,000 and 7,000. And as far as fentanyl goes, we get a new case on average of at least one a day. The rare day that we don't get a fentanyl-related case, we make up for it the next day with 2 or 3 sometimes, okay? So this is something we deal with on a constant and regular basis. And so that's where we're coming from. And I can tell you that as a former cop and as an attorney, you get a lot of satisfaction arresting somebody and putting somebody in prison. But that's not why we do this. As it relates to fentanyl and drugs, we really view this as saving lives, okay? I can tell you, sorry if I get choked up. Some of this does get kind of emotional. In my lifetime, in my career, not with fentanyl, but with opiates, okay? I have had a cousin die. I've had a high school friend die. I've had people I go to church with die. I've seen cops lose children and fellow attorneys lose children due to opiate addictions, okay? And I know of nobody who would rather visit a gravestone than would rather visit somebody in jail. So there are times where even with just addicts, it comes a point where we have to lock them up and send them to prison. It's not the preferred way to do things. We'd rather keep them on probation. We'd rather keep them employed, get them treatment, get them help. But there does come a time where we have to lock people up. But we don't take joy in doing that. It's very sad because we see these people's wives and husbands and children in court. Cops are in their homes. They see the neglect and the abuse. Okay, nobody enjoys that. And so we're all here because we want to save lives, okay? And so how do we do that? Okay, and we usually prosecute possession or people possessing drugs with the intent to distribute or deal, and then we prosecute drug dealers. And all those things are felonies when we deal with fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, meth, stuff like that. But when we prosecute for possession, we prosecute for possession with intent, and we prosecute for delivery, the judge has complete discretion to put that person on probation, even if I ask for prison, okay? And prison's not for everybody, but every once in a while we think somebody has to go to prison. And the problem with these statutes is the judges have the discretion to give somebody probation, no matter how strongly I feel about it. A few decades ago in Idaho, the legislature created a new law called trafficking. And what trafficking is it's just possession plus weight. With heroin, a minimum of 2 grams, and that doesn't sound like a lot. That's basically 20 doses. With cocaine and meth, it's an ounce, 28 grams. So if somebody gets charged or caught with 2 grams of heroin or more, or 28 grams of meth or cocaine or more, we can charge them with trafficking. I don't have to prove they possessed it with any intent. I don't have to prove they delivered it to anybody. It's just they possessed it, and we put it on a scale and weigh it, and if it's above the threshold, it's trafficking. And the reason why trafficking is so important is because it takes away a judge's discretion to put these people on probation. They have to go to prison. Now, I can tell you that sounds kind of harsh sometimes. Most of the time when I get a trafficking case, I'm going to reduce it to possession with intent or possession, and I'm going to force somebody to go to treatment. But every once in a while, we have to stick them with trafficking and send them to prison. And I can tell you, trafficking has been kind of controversial. There's a lot of people down in the legislature, a lot of people around the state that don't like trafficking because they don't think druggies should be in prison. Okay, but trafficking is a very good tool because, in my opinion, we don't overuse it. We use it with a little bit of discretion, but it's a very good deterrent. You heard a comment earlier that Coeur d'Alene is a good place to raise a family, but a bad place to be a drug dealer, okay? For years, I prosecuted cases from the task force, and these trafficking statutes are a major deterrent. I can't count how many text messages I've read from drug dealers. Okay, when you catch a drug dealer, you try to flip them so you can get the bigger fish. Usually the bigger fish are in Spokane or further west, okay? And when law enforcement catch a drug dealer and they flip them, they're going to be texting their source in Spokane or Seattle or Portland, and they're going to be ordering up more drugs, and they're going to be asking these drug dealers to come to Coeur d'Alene with the drugs because they want to buy more. And then when they show up, what's going to happen? The cops are going to arrest them. We got the bigger fish, right? Text message after text message. Countless times I've read where the drug dealers in Washington and California and Oregon, they're saying, I'm not coming to Idaho. You got to come to me and get the drugs. Says, I'm not coming to Idaho because if I get caught with this amount of drugs in Idaho, I'm going to prison. That's what we mean by Coeur d'Alene's a nice place to raise a family, but a bad place to be a drug dealer. Having trafficking statutes it builds an imaginary wall and it keeps people out of Idaho. Problem is we did not have a trafficking code for fentanyl. Why? Because fentanyl is man-made and it's kind of new. As you've heard, fentanyl used to only exist in liquid form, like when you get an epidural or something like that in the hospital, or a patch. When I first saw fentanyl, it was 10 years ago. Some drug dealer in town had a wife who had a fentanyl patch prescription, and when she died, he started selling her patches. Okay? Went for a lot of money on the street because it's pretty rare you'd come across a patch. Well, now they're putting them in these pills, and they're being produced by the cartel, and they're pennies on the dollar. And so that's why we've seen a lot more fentanyl lately. The problem was we could catch somebody with fentanyl, and they're going to get probation. We can catch somebody possessing 1,000 fentanyl pills, and they have the intent to deliver them. Or we'll catch somebody dealing fentanyl, and our judges could put them on probation. Fortunately, our legislature and our governor just passed a new law. It takes effect July 1st. We now have a fentanyl trafficking law. And again, this was controversial. It almost didn't pass. And I hope we never have the day come where the legislature takes these laws away. But now we can put people in prison for trafficking fentanyl. You may have heard the phrase, one pill can kill. Okay, and when you catch somebody on the street with 5, 10, 20 pills, it feels good because one pill could kill. 20 pills could cost 20 people their lives. So, I told you, trafficking is possession plus weight. So the legislature and the governor had a job to do. They had to decide how many pills is it going to take to get to trafficking. They didn't just randomly pick a number, they picked 100 pills. So now when we catch somebody with 100 or more pills, and we convict them of trafficking, they have to go to prison. Does 100 pills sound like a lot? It does. But guess how many fentanyl pills are coming through Coeur d'Alene? 2 months ago, Post Falls police searched the vehicle. They found 40,000 fentanyl pills. Okay, that's almost enough to wipe out the entire population of Coeur d'Alene. About, 53,000 people here? Okay, so when you read these stories that are happening in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, okay, it's happening here. Imagine if that stuff just got unloaded into our high schools. And it's happened. 2 years ago, I prosecuted a 17-year-old boy. He was weeks away from graduation, weeks away from turning 18. He gave a fentanyl pill to a fellow high school student, and the fellow high school student almost died in the gym room. I charged him as an adult, and I sent him to prison for a year to get treatment. Okay? And I can tell you, this is very common. He didn't sell the pill. and he didn't give him 10. He gave him 1. And he gave him 1 pill because his friend was sick. Opiates are highly addictive. I heard a statistic once from an old judge regarding methamphetamine. He said, I don't know where he got these numbers from, but he said, if you use meth one time, you have a 40% chance of getting addicted. You use meth twice, it goes over 90%. Opiates are more addictive. Fentanyl is more addictive than even meth. And so these people who are addicted to opiates, fentanyl, when they don't get their drug, they get violently ill and sick. They hurt. And when their fellow friends have pills and they give them to their friends, they don't view that as being a drug dealer or getting rich. They view that as helping a friend. So a lot of these deliveries are just people who think they're helping their friends who are sick. It's very, very sad. And so I can tell you, again, we're all here to save lives. These pills are, again, synthetic. That means they're man-made. They're not made by pharmaceutical companies. They're made in cartel labs. There's no quality control. You heard that story about the overdose. He took a half a pill one night, he lived. He took a half a pill the next day, and he died. No 2 pills are the same. And so there's no telling what you're going to get, and that's why people are dying. I just want to make sure I covered everything. And when we're not charging people with possessing fentanyl, it's still provoking law enforcement response and response from fire and paramedics. I mean, Jeremy Heil here can tell you every night cops are responding to calls where people are passed out behind the wheel at a red light, at a stop sign in front of 7-Eleven, in a parking garage, and people are passed out behind the wheel because they've taken fentanyl and they pass out. Police show up thinking they're going to save somebody's life. They've got a warrant or they've got a gun they shouldn't have or whatever, and it's leading to an arrest or another charge. And so law enforcement officers are stumbling across fentanyl, and it's dangerous for them. Officers stand the chance of overdosing through incidental contact, and so do our firemen and firewomen. And so it touches every aspect of society, no matter what your socioeconomic status is. I think that's about everything I have. If I think of something I missed that was really important, I'll probably snatch the microphone away from somebody else. But aside from that, I really appreciate you being here. As Luke said at the beginning of this, your job after this is to go home and educate somebody else. That's why we're here, to save lives and to educate people. I'm really pleased with the outcome today. These seats are about half full. That's really great. I've been in forums like this where there's only 2 people here. But I would venture to say now, you guys, I'm charging you with a responsibility to go home and share this knowledge with somebody else. In a few months, we're going to have a part 2 to this forum. I'd like to see all of you back plus more people. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to educate people because fentanyl kills, and you don't want it in our society any more than it already is. And again, if you see your local legislator, thank them for passing the fentanyl law. And if you ever hear of a movement to get rid of trafficking statutes, please oppose it and talk to your legislatures. We need trafficking laws. All right, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that perspective. I do have one question for you before we move on, just to add a little bit of information. Could you explain what the task force is? I don't think we covered that.
Sure. So there's a few task forces in town, and they've evolved over time, and they've changed names, and officers have changed. But right now, there's a DEA task force, and as you can imagine, that's made of local DEA agents. They're federal, but they live here locally. And over time, sometimes it's involved the ISP troopers, and sometimes it's involved Coeur d'Alene police officers. You have local task forces that are a combination of local task officers like Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County, Post Falls. Sometimes Post Falls or Coeur d'Alene or Kootenai County will have their own task force. Okay, and so what a task force is, depending on when we're talking about, it's a group of officers, sometimes federal, sometimes state, county, city, and sometimes a combination of them, put together with a prosecutor or two, and their sole mission is to go after drugs. It's to get drugs off the street, it's to find the drug dealers, and it's to put a dent in this, effort from, drug dealers to hurt the community. So in a nutshell, that's what a task force is. It's a concerted, targeted effort to go after some really bad people who are dealing drugs in our community. And our task force has been here for a long time. And the undercover officers, they find drug dealers, they flip them into confidential informants, and they just, you catch a fish, you go after the bigger fish. And when you get the bigger fish, there's always a bigger fish. And the task is how high up, can you get? How much of a bigger fish can you find?
Thank you for that. I think that's a great segue to talk about some law enforcement, Jeremy, and some of the things that you're seeing, out on the street and in the jail.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to my fellow guest speakers up here. I'm Jeremy Howell, captain of the Sheriff's Office, and currently my assignment is the commander of the jail. And I think we can hit on some of the things that are going on the streets, and I think Josh and Stan and John have talked about that. But I want to give a unique perspective. I don't necessarily have any emotional stories to share, but I want to give you some stats that hit home right here in Kootenai County. The Kootenai County Jail has a capacity of 451 people. Now, to put that in perspective, Bonner County is approximately 50, and Shoshone County is 20 to 30. So we have a very large jail. Depending on the day, it's the third or fourth largest jail. Ada County, Canyon County, obviously bigger, and then Bonneville built a new wing. So it's a competition of who's bigger. But we're one of the biggest jails in the state. As of today, there are 422 people in the Kootenai County Jail. 70% of those are felony charges. So 335 people are currently in the Kootenai County Jail facing felony charges. And those are all pre-sentenced, or they've been sentenced and waiting to get sent down to prison. And of those, so out of 335 people, 54 are in jail on fentanyl charges alone. Now, out of the rest of those, they could be drug-related. They could be a different opioid that has fentanyl in it. They could be somebody who was passed out in their car, and once we dealt with it, there was no fentanyl in the car, but they went on a warrant or some other charges. So the statistics are what you make of them, but out of 335 people in on felonies, 54 are just fentanyl. I broke it down because I'm sure somebody's going to ask, well, they're probably all from Washington, right? Because that's where all these problems are coming from. And again, stats are what you make of it. Out of the 54, 31% are Kootenai County residents that are live and work in our community and are in jail on fentanyl. So it's not a Washington problem where we're catching the drug dealers. Some of them, I'm sure, probably are the Washington drug dealers, but there are people in our community that are currently sitting in jail on fentanyl charges. So it is here. And this is just adults. This has I don't have juvenile stats. This is the adults. The other thing I wanted to share is, as Josh was talking, I have drug-related overdose deaths for Kootenai County. I have a couple years worth, but I was trying to do a little rough math as he was talking. In 2022, there were 42 overdoses in Kootenai County. That's handled by the Kootenai County coroner. And we were talking earlier, I'm not sure if the Kootenai County coroner covers the reservoir. Do they? Yeah. Okay. So the entirety of Kootenai County, there were 42 overdose deaths in 2022. In the state of Idaho, on Josh's slide, there's 270 in the state of Idaho. So if you do a little math, there are 44 counties in the state of Idaho. If you average that out and everybody had the same amount, everybody would have 8. We had 42. Okay, that's a huge number. That shows you that problem is here. In 2019, we had 23 overdose. 2 of them were opioid related. Okay, everything else was, it's somebody with their car in a garage, prescription, unintentional, intentional. Again, we can start going down that road, but the big number, 270 in the state of Idaho, 42 right here in Kootenai County that are opioid related or fentanyl specific related. So that's what I wanted to impress upon you guys, that it's here, it's now, and we're dealing with it on the law enforcement level and the prosecutor's level, but the community needs to help, and we all need to band together to fight the problem. I'm just here representing the sheriff's office. There are 5 other local law enforcement agencies here: Sergeant Boardman from the Coeur d'Alene Police Department, Chief Abrahamson from the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the state police, the federal, the state, the local. Everybody works together, and even if we're not on a formal task force, I have a couple deputies, they have a couple officers, they have a couple officers. We work together on a case, and then we go back to our own agencies and continue the work. So even if we're not a formal task force, everybody is still working together to try to combat this problem. But the problem is there's still only so many of us to go around.
Thank you. Just a couple quick follow-ups, since I've had the chance to tour the jail and see firsthand some of the things that are going on there. Can you talk a little bit about what commonly happens when you're just processing inmates when they're coming through? Like, how common is it for somebody to have pills on them, for example?
It's very common because, again, a pill, depending on what size they're making it, they're not very big. And you try to search somebody on the side of the road and you think you did a good job and find everything they had on them, and then they have a coin pocket, they have a pair of shorts under their pants. So my deputies in the jail are daily finding contraband on the inmates coming in, and this isn't the officers and deputies missing anything, it's they're so small, and we're very thorough. Because once they get in our facility, we go through everything, and we take the socks inside out, shoes off, and we're still finding the things they've had hidden on them when they come into jail. Yeah.
I remembered something as it relates to the jail. And now, there are a lot of people who have a high tolerance for this drug. Even though one pill could kill, there are people that use a couple dozen pills a day. And it's a combination of their tolerance is high because they've been using so long, and it's a combination of maybe the pills they're taking don't have a fatal dose in them. But these people in their mind, I can take 10 pills a day. I take 1 on the hour every hour. I'm taking 20 pills a day. Sometimes these people will get locked up and they'll spend weeks in jail. When they get out, they're going to go back to using the 20 pills they were taking beforehand. Well, now their tolerance is down, and or the pills are stronger, and they're overdosing and dying. And so that's part of that statistic there, and that's what the jail deals with. These people come to jail, they sober up for a little bit, they hit the street because it's so addictive, they go back to using the same number of pills they were using, and they overdose.
Thank you for that. Sam Abrahamson's the chief of police for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, and as Josh mentioned at the beginning, this is a problem that affects all demographics, all communities, and including the tribal community. How has this recent influx of fentanyl changed the way that you and your officers work on a daily basis?
So, everybody here that spoke, it's the same thing happening down where we're at. Our community's tight. We don't have there's a lot more people living in there, but I've been doing this policing for 25 years now, and I've seen trends coming up from when I first started until now. It started with marijuana. That was a big thing back when I first started, and then went into cocaine, heroin, and then, then fentanyl came, and it's unfortunate that, working with it's great working with these gentlemen right here because we're all battling the same thing. Fentanyl just took one of our tribal members just last week. It's happening everywhere. Talking about pills, I have, people that I grew up with do 20 pills a day to keep going. It's just crazy how we're looking at it, that one fatal pill can take her out, but she does 20 of them a day. And we'll sit there and we'll talk to them and say, why do you keep taking these? And that's going to happen. I can't stop. I just say, I can't stop. She's been in a facility, and then she gets out, and then she just continues to keep doing. And then now what's happening is that especially if get in our schools, and that's why it's so important to get into schools and talk to people and talk to the kids in school, because a lot of it's curiosity too. They hear this and social media, and they see weird people, or not weird people, excuse me. They see people do weird things, and they're wondering, man, that's funny. You know, social media is a huge thing right now regarding a lot of that stuff. And the reason why how I know that is that the kids will talk about it. And but you know, I know the jail sees a lot of that too, coming from down south. You know, and I want to get the bad people. That's what we're here to do. We're making up more, you know, approaches on how we're going to be dealing with this. But it's everyday thing. It's just something comes up. It's cocaine and fentanyl now. Fentanyl's in everything, you know. Getting creative on making, you know, fentanyl candy, looking like candy to these little kids, you know. I had parents down there really, really concerned about Halloween, you know, because fentanyl looks like candy. You know, and they were concerned about the candy that they were taking. And, you know, everybody was all alert on that, looking, and, you know, and the best thing I could tell them is just make sure you look at your candy, look at your kids' candy and what they're taking, what they're getting, because you'll never know. You'll never know. Working well together on battling this. I mean, our department works well with the Sheriff's Department, Idaho State Police, and we also were BIA agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. DEA. I mean, a lot of this links up to everywhere. Not only just in the Kootenai County, not only Benwell County, not all on the tribe, but it's everywhere, and everybody's doing the best that they can. And the thing I can say is it's going to be it's a huge effort from everybody. You know, my kids, I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. They don't have rights, and I'm in their phone all the time. You know what I mean? I'm just telling them, no, look, you know, I mean, you just never know. But that's where we're at. Fentanyl, cocaine. That's what we're dealing with right now. So,
Can you talk a little bit about, you know, some of the changes you've seen among, you know, the folks who use, you know, that we're talking about a one pill can kill, and now we've got Narcan that can
Yes.
revive people. You talk a little bit about how the behavior of you know, some of the community has
Yes.
changed with that.
So, and this is a shocker, but we have overdoses probably, I would say, I don't know how many a day down there. That's not reported at all. Just talking with some of the community members and some of my friends. I've lost friends from fentanyl. I lost, you know, kids that I've seen growing up in high school. You know, they're gone no more because of the fentanyl. But majority of some of our addicts, they self-medicate themselves. They won't do fentanyl by themselves anymore. They have somebody sitting there with them just in case if they go in an overdose situation. They got a Narcan and they'll bring them back, and then they wake up like nothing happened, and then they'll continue on, and that's the problem. That is the most scariest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I mean, why go into overdose and then somebody's sitting there and bring you back, and then you do it again, and it's just like. The fentanyl, it's just, they say it just consumes you. It's just the high that, I don't know. I don't know what it is. But they were talking about the price. They said it's so easy to get. You know, it was, we're talking about a pill. It was 75 cents. Somebody bought one for 75 cents, you know, and 20 of a day. Same dealer, you know. And people have their just different dealer. But the guy's in prison now, so he's no longer around that was dealing them. But talking about, you know, having dealers out of Spokane, getting the big ones out of Spokane, Montana, or wherever. I'll let our task force deal with that. But I got a tribal member that goes in there and buys a bunch of dope and come out and deal. No matter if a tribal member or a non-tribal member on the reservation, I'm dealing with you right now. And you're the one that's going to be dealing with if it's non-tribal member or the federal or the state stuff, right? They're dealing, you know, you got the big wigs dealing with the bigger stuff, but it all matches up. So
Appreciate that. You know, just to stick with the, you know, law enforcement for a second and enforcing on the street. One of the earlier slides that I think Josh was talking about mentioned that even contact with fentanyl can be very harmful, potentially deadly. So, you know, when when the sheriff's department is out on the street, your officers are out on the street, how has it changed the way they do, what precautions do they have to take?
So when fentanyl started to hit, Sergeant Boardman was actually working for me on graveyards, and we had that concern of airborne fentanyl, or if you touch it. Back when we had marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, we would field test it, and we had to. We have to have a presumptive test for these drugs before the prosecutors can prove that it's a drug that they can prosecute. But all of a sudden, we had a concern that if we mess with this drug, it would, either get in our skin, get in our mouths, our eyes, or whatever, and we would overdose on it. So immediately, I can say there's probably no law enforcement officer in the state of Idaho, at the very least Kootenai County, that doesn't have Narcan on them for themselves, and then for somebody they come in contact with. But it changed the way we handle the drugs. We used to pull it out, and I'm not gonna lie, pull my pocket knife out, use it to cut something open, test the drug, wipe it off on my pants, and put it back in my pocket. Gone are those days, because now we have to clean everything we have, not for COVID, but for fentanyl, right? So the way we handle the drugs, if you use gloves, masks, goggles, we've seen across the country law enforcement contact with it. They, a tactical unit will throw a flashbang in a house and cause the fentanyl to go airborne, and then they all overdose on it while they're serving a search warrant on a drug house. So these are all concerns that we have, that we talk about on at least a weekly basis for the sheriff's office, in the jail, and on patrol, let alone the other agencies that deal with the same thing.
Also, we've dealt with, we're dealing with a guy with a pound of meth. What he did is that he was busting it up, and once we pulled him over, he's throwing it at the officer type stuff. Anything can happen on a traffic stop, and that's why the training that a lot of the patrol officers have, it's very needed, just for things like that. Their awareness is huge. So.
Thank you. Just to stick with Jeremy and on the ground and your experience there, I'd imagine a lot of calls come in to 911 to dispatch for somebody who's unresponsive, or it might be more of a medical emergency. How often do those calls where either the fire department or EMS might be responding turn into a law enforcement response?
So just so you guys know, the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office runs the 911 dispatch center for the county outside of Post Falls and Rathdrum, but all the medical calls go through the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. So the screen that I see has medical calls for the entire county for all 5 or 6 medical entities in the county, and there are unresponsives, overdose, unconscious, whatever they call it, and the questioning that's asked, those are some of the concerns that the dispatchers have for all of us, because they want to get that information front-loaded so we know what we're getting into. But fire, medical, law enforcement, these are coming in daily for the county, and I can't say it's one agency or the other, but the county, I see that those calls are coming in, and that's a concern for every one of us, especially if it's an unknown. We don't know why this person is passed out. We find them on the side of the road, slumped over in their car, but any of these calls, we're going in with the same precautions, because you never know when you're going to stumble upon it, because there's not one demographic. We can't say it's all of, this age group of this kind of people. It's everybody. It's, children, it's adults, it's, accidental, it's intentional, it's everybody. So every time we go to a call, we're concerned about running into that, especially these unresponsive calls.
Thanks. Yeah, and just speaking of
Bless you.
the contamination, John, I know you've spent a lot of time when fentanyl is discovered, or if there's even suspected that it might be there. What goes into, cleansing that scene so that it's safe for folks to be around?
Well, it can't be cleaned up with ordinary household cleaners, so bleach wipes, things like that you would traditionally think. Drugs like methamphetamine and fentanyl, and now xylazine, which we're starting to see mixed in with the fentanyl, need to be cleaned with an oxidizer, and they can be neutralized and then removed that way. So that's started a company actually doing that after I retired. And I learned a lot more after that when on how to clean it and test for it and things like that, so.
But it's not something that a normal,
No, no. But so what happens is, and we actually have a mass spectrometer to test surfaces, and what we have found in some of our, not only through some training and studies, but also our own tests, is that if you take even like a bleach wipe and just wipe a surface away, you don't remove the fentanyl or the methamphetamine. You actually just move it. It doesn't take it away. And we did some experiments and some testing with ISP a couple of months ago, where we knew that we had a contaminated surface, and we did it with a bleach wipe, and then we hit it with we use a product called Dahlgren to neutralize it and remove it. So yeah, it's unfortunately it's a problem. We were just looking at a stolen car this morning where it was just covered with fentanyl and methamphetamine, and sometimes you can see it and sometimes you can't, and that's why we have the mass spectrometer to test it.
That's a serious situation.
It is. One of the things about, I don't want to over dramatize it. One of the things we do find is with fentanyl in particular, it's not, you can touch it and it's not going to kill you. What gets you is if it's such small amounts, you don't know it's on your finger. And so you touch your eye, you touch your nose. A lot of firefighters pick their nose, and so they're constantly, can't help myself. No, and so in all seriousness, that's where the fentanyl becomes a problem, is when it becomes airborne, or if it gets on like you were saying, you clean your knife off. Yeah, and now it's like, well, now you have fentanyl in your pants, and you take that home, and and so that's where we've run into problems more than anything. So,
Thank you for that. Josh, I might go back to you for just a little bit here. And I think one of the recurring themes that we've heard, starting with your comments earlier and throughout, is how broadly this affects all the communities. And can you talk a little bit about how critical the partnerships are between different jurisdictions and agencies to fight this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see that in this panel and in the discussion we've had, and I can get really granular in explaining task forces and all that. But I think for purposes of our audience, and what you need to know just as citizens, is that we're all in this together. Whatever case comes to our office or might go to Stan's office is going to be a partnership and a discussion among probably someone, if we're talking about fentanyl, and there's a federal connection at DEA, but they're supported by Coeur d'Alene Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, and nothing gets done without those partnerships, frankly. We prosecute many fewer cases than Stan's office does, for good reason, right? We're talking about federal prison versus local jails and some other type of rehabilitation options that are available locally in our communities. So we don't put people in federal prison lightly. So our case numbers are lower, but of the 300 cases that we prosecute every year statewide, 90% of those are going to be the result of a federal, local, state partnership. So I think that is what I would convey to this group, is that we have our statutes that we use that are frankly now pretty similar to what we have on the state level. And it doesn't matter to me whether we end up prosecuting it or it's a county prosecutor. What matters to us is the result. And I think that's really reflected in what we see from our law enforcement partners at every federal, state, local level.
Appreciate that. Yep, we're going to get to that in just one second. There's only two things I wanted to do really quickly. First of all, was not to leave out our other law enforcement partners, so I wanted to give a shout out to the Coeur d'Alene Police Department for that important work, and check in real quick if there's anything you'd like to add.
Give me a captive audience and a microphone. All right, hope you can, Coach.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be real brief. 'Cause I know you guys. Yeah, I'll be real brief, or as brief as I can be, because I know you guys have a lot of questions. My name's Eric Boardman. I'm a patrol sergeant with Coeur d'Alene Police. While I'm jealous of Mr. Kemp's current position, I love being a street cop. It's honestly a privilege to do that here in this community. In response, we just started an opiate task force within Coeur d'Alene City. The reason for that is truly kind of a terrible one. It's because our overdose deaths have risen to a point that we require a task force to come in and kind of come in after the fact. Unfortunately, by the time we get there, it's corrective. We're trying to break it down from something terrible and then hold people accountable afterwards. Another mission of that is similar to what Mr. Kempf does and his team and everybody else up here. We try to educate. I just left Lakeland Middle School right before this with 7th graders. I hate that we're at a place in society where I have to go teach 7th graders about fentanyl and pills. But we're not, this isn't going anywhere. A lot of cops talk about, well, it's always a new thing. Fentanyl's just the new thing. I don't think this one's going anywhere. It's too small. It's too easy to change it, manipulate it, change the delivery mechanism. What we're seeing, those blue pills, probably still the most common. Now it's just straight up powder. We had one the other day that was like a purplish powder. Super concentrated, really potent, really hard to dose yourself appropriately, which is part of the reason it's so dangerous. The last time I checked the pills, when they talk about a lethal quantity, talking about a variation between 2 milligrams and 6 milligrams. My wife's an ER nurse. If you go to the hospital because you're hurt, they give you 100 micrograms in a needle for pain. That's a 20th of the small dosage quantity that's inside the pills. I've investigated an overdose of a 16-year-old where he smoked a quarter of a pill. And luckily for our juveniles, most of the time they live with their parents. They can get brought back if there's Narcan. But it just seems to be getting younger. It's a younger generation. We mentioned MDMA. Almost all of that's cut with fentanyl now because it's cheaper and it mimics dopamine the same as MDMA does. When I first started, when I was working for then Sergeant Heil on graveyards, a hard user was using 4 to 6 pills a day, and they cost 15 to 20 bucks. That's what we were seeing street level, and then they were selling for 30 or 40 bucks in Montana. We've had several in the last 2 weeks, 50 pills. 50 pills a day. And if you're buying them in boats, they're 50 cents. 50 cents to $1. It just speaks to the supply and demand and what's actually out there. And they're including it with powder-based fentanyl. Go ahead. What's a boat? Oh, sorry. A boat is, now it's 1,000. It used to be 100, but they actually changed it. Now it means 1,000 pills. A yacht is 10,000. Used to be 1,000, but that just, again, speaks to the change in the industry. And at the end of the day, it's just an industry. And I had a super innocent 7th grader say, well, Sergeant Boardman, if you guys know where these labs are, why don't you just go stop them? I would love to. I didn't want to explain to her jurisdiction, but I would love to do that. Like I said, maybe like a 2-week deployment, that'd be pretty cool. But very innocent question and a very simple answer, and that's, there's a lot of really bad people making a whole lot of money. And eventually they assign a dollar value to our kids' lives. When you talk about addiction, here's something wild for you to think about. If we have an overdose death here local, guess who becomes the most popular dealer in town? That one. Think about that for a minute. They call it chasing the dragon. This whole presentation could be called chasing the dragon, because that first high you get gets into your pleasure receptors, and that's the best you're ever going to get, and you damage them. And then the next one, you're chasing it, right? And it's just this endless cycle until eventually it doesn't even get you high or make you happy anymore. It's just to get right so you don't hurt. We recognize fully, I realize my role, I'm the enforcement, right? That's my role. I'm the consequences. But I firmly agree you can't arrest your way out of this problem. But you'd be amazed at how many people that I've taken to jail for this, and they thank me for it at the end, because it's the only thing that would have got them sober. So these guys up here, and we're talking about the trends here locally and how important it is, I realize we're maybe not the small town we once were, but all of us up here are coordinating to try to combat this as best as we can. And at the state level, getting that law, House Bill 406, that's massive for us. The most dangerous substance our society's ever seen, and we didn't have the best law prosecute it. We're going to now, which is huge for us. And I dive into phones all the time. Some of the stuff you unearth, I wish I hadn't seen. But you dive into phones and you see people are afraid of coming to Idaho. They're afraid of doing that here. But we're so close to other parts of we're so close to Spokane. I grew up there. I can talk a little bit of trash, Lewis and Clark graduate. It's just different than it used to be, and it's easily accessible. Yeah, that was my short variety. I'm sorry. You get me talking about fentanyl, I'll get pretty excited. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to do, we've talked a lot about the problem, the seriousness of the problem, some of the law enforcement efforts that are being made, to stop it. But the other piece of it is what else can be done. And part of that is education. That's part of the important work that we're doing right now and that John is doing in schools around the area. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that the second part of this conversation is going to be about the clinical aspect of treatment. And so the next one we're going to have is going to be talking about that with CUNY Health, Panhandle Health, and Heritage Health, and the things that they're trying to do as well. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. And I'm going to have to move the mic around because we're kind of short on them.
Thank you. My question is, we've talked about the obvious, the trafficker, the drug dealer, and then obviously those that are addicted to the drugs, but I wonder if you could talk about the accidental overdoses, the avenues in which an unsuspecting person might be contaminated by fentanyl. For example, if you happen to be in a public place and there's fentanyl that you become in contact with, or if you're in a hotel room and maybe there's fentanyl in there. I wonder if you could talk a little about not necessarily the drug dealer and the addict, but what are the different ways that someone that is a completely innocent bystander also be contaminated?
Stanley?
I can give you a little bit of insight to that, and I can tell you I've read so many police reports where officers or probation officers will go into a home and people are scrambling like cockroaches when you turn the light on, and they're hiding their drugs everywhere, and they'll search the home and they'll find fentanyl and drugs that have been hidden in the crib, in the toddler's dresser where the clothes are, where the toys are. There are cases where people are throwing things out the window on a traffic stop before they get pulled over, and so, in trash cans. And so that affects the public, because when people are in public and they're carrying their fentanyl pills or whatever else drugs they're carrying, and they feel pressure by law enforcement, it doesn't matter if they're in their own home or if they're in the public, they're going to be ditching and depositing their drugs anywhere and everywhere, so that when they're contacted by law enforcement and they're searched, cops don't find their drugs. It's possible that a kid on a playground, a parent, or whoever could stumble across it in public under any number of circumstances and come into incidental contact with it. I don't have statistics over how many people overdose or come in contact with that way, but we read so many police reports where people are just throwing things and depositing them everywhere so that they don't get caught with what they have. Who knows who finds it and where they find it after that?
Just a quick follow-up before John grabs that mic. So if you're walking around in the park and you find a baggie with some bright-colored pills, what should you do with them?
Call the police.
There are times where people will do that. They'll come out to their vehicle, they'll go to check the mail, and there's a wallet, or there's a baggie, or there's something on their end of the sidewalk, in front of their garage, next to their mailbox. And it's innocent. I'm gonna open up the wallet, I'm gonna look for the ID, because when I find the name and the address, I'm gonna go drive it home to them, right? Or it's a purse that they left in the cart at Walmart, in the cart return. And people are just trying to be good neighbors and find out who owns this so I can give it to them, or just call the police. Let the police look at it, let the police handle it. Don't pick up anything, especially if it's like on a playground or wherever, right? And it looks suspicious. Don't touch it. Call the police, let them do that. They'll handle it. that it's a pill. It doesn't look like a dirty baggie, it's in a wallet or something. So yeah, if you find anything, if you don't know what it is, even though you're trying to be the honest neighbor and you're trying to return somebody's property, because if you leave it there, the next person's gonna come and take it, right? Call the police, let them handle it.
One of the scary statistics that has happened in the last 3 years, now the leading cause of poisonings of children under the age of 5 is fentanyl poisoning. And so kids are finding these pills and they're eating them or powder. The other thing where we talk about this accidental contamination is Good Samaritans trying to do the right thing. We don't see a lot of powder fentanyl in this area right now, but it's coming. It is the preferred fentanyl, preferred type of fentanyl for users because they don't have to deal with all the pills and everything. So it's coming. But around the country, what we have seen is people that will come across somebody that is overdosing. It looks very similar to someone that is choking. They have purple and they check their vitals. They can't get a heartbeat, and so they start CPR. And the old method of CPR is what? Plug their nose, mouth to mouth, right? And that mouth to mouth, this is a person that has most likely has fentanyl either on their face or something, and so they're getting poisoned by this. So it is something that is taking place, and I think Sam's giving great advice. You find something that doesn't look right, just report it to the police and have them come look at it. They'll have the gloves, they'll have the masks, they'll have the things that they can, and they'll, most of the officers, especially if they've been on for a minute or two, will understand what they're looking at. And they are, even though we're very curious, if we don't know what it is, we're going to call someone that does. We'll take a picture of it and go, hey, what's this? So.
Great. Did you have a?
Yeah, so if you see somebody in distress, no CPR.
Well, CPR now, I think the common method is just compressions and no mouth to mouth.
Okay.
Unless you have a mask, yes.
So are you saying we can, like, push, if it's powder form, if you push your grocery cart, or cart? Like, I'm scared.
No, I don't want to, yeah, so I don't want it to cause unnecessary panic. The big takeaway is that fentanyl, when we first started to see this in 2014 in the country, in about 2016, there was the DEA and the CDC and others said if you touch it, you'll drop over dead. And that's turned out not to be true. It's not as transdermal, it does not go through the skin, but cuts on the skin, things like that. So you just wash your hands. I mean, it's the best advice I can give. If you do get some sort of unknown powder in your hand, and use soap and water, don't use alcohol, because alcohol actually will cause it to absorb into your skin faster. So.
I just had a question. When you guys are going into the schools, are you guys taking any, like I have had drug addiction problems myself, and I feel like when you're able to speak to somebody in like schools, giving like live testimonials, are you guys doing any of that at all?
So we when we're going into the schools in front of students, that is not part of the program. And I can elaborate on reasons why that is. When we do our community talks and we are out in a forum like this, then we absolutely, if somebody wants to kind of give their testimonial or talk about the things that they've been through, that to us is a more appropriate setting than in front of students. There are programs out there. It's just that's not our program. But there are absolutely programs that get people that have kind of come through the other side and present to students and things like that. But that's not the program that we do. Okay. If that answers your question.
Just curious.
And on that, speaking about the jail again, I can tell you that the detention deputies, if our jail was empty, everybody would be happy because then we don't have anything to do. But we don't just babysit the inmates. We have a programs manager that's our chaplain, that has 50 volunteers, and we bring people in like you to talk to people who are in, regardless of what they're in for, the programs are offered to them. They have AA, we have NA, we have several different programs, and sometimes the best person that they have to listen to is somebody who's been in their shoes. Sometimes the best person they have to listen to is somebody from the religious side. So he has multiple volunteers that come in and donate their time to speak to inmates to try to prevent them from coming back to jail. As we talk about the educational piece, if we can keep them from coming back to jail and to work with the prosecutors and they don't end up in prison, or if they end up in prison and we can keep them from coming back, I think that's a win for everybody. If we save one life, if we get one person to not go back to jail, then it's not just arresting them and them sitting there and thinking about what they've done. They get the educational piece, and we've had success stories coming from jail where they go back out on the streets and we don't see them again. So I think that would be, along with what John's talking about, is the appropriate platform for that.
Oh, so NICDE, is that completely shut down? Because I know that they were handing out drug supplies as well, and Narcan to the community. Is that no longer available?
I think we're in a transitional period with Narcan. It was available through the health districts. They have, as we've gone around, more on that.
President Swain, everybody.
Yeah, so all of our security guys now have Narcan. So it's available here on campus. We get it from Panhandle Health, and the new formulation doesn't need to have refrigeration. It's easy to use, so all of them have it or have access to it, yeah.
Panhandle Health, through the opioid settlement fund, they actually have a Narcan leave behind program where Coeur d'Alene Fire and soon to be Kootenai Fire, if they respond to an overdose, they leave that back there and behind there. As far as I know, every public school and a lot of the private schools, middle schools, unfortunately, that we need that, but it's in middle schools and high schools as well. So if you're talking about the behavioral health group that's on Northwest, they distribute that also.
So I just want to take the chance to talk about Narcan for a second. We're big proponents of it. I think I haven't met law enforcement or prosecutors that aren't. But I want to just point out it's not foolproof, right? We've heard stories of people that have had or given someone 8 or 9 doses of Narcan and they still can't revive them. So it's extremely powerful. It's a great tool. We're supportive of it being widespread, but let's not pretend like it's going to save every life and it's a solution, because it's a treatment, but it's not a solution.
And you can't Narcan yourself. And I tell that to cops because it's not a bulletproof vest. You're going to need someone to administer Narcan, because if you're the person that is going into overdose, you'll be on the floor. You will not have the cognitive ability to go overdose.
Yeah, officers are carrying Narcan, and they're more than happy to use it on somebody else who's overdosing, but the reason why cops wear Narcan is for themselves, or it's for a fellow officer, because when you stumble across an officer, you're going to try to use your Narcan on them or their Narcan on them. And so they're more than happy to save somebody else's life who's overdosing, but we're not kidding here. Cops are carrying Narcan for themselves, first and foremost, but they're happy to use it on somebody else. And so, my office has Narcan because we have public coming in, victims, witnesses, people, talk to the fire department, talk to the Panhandle Health, talk to medical professionals, and if you think you need Narcan in your home for whatever reason, try to get a hold of some of it. And the other thing is, I was talking with Chief, these overdose statistics, I think they're kind of low. There are documented instances, you've heard before, people are using not by themselves anymore, they're using with a partner, so that if they overdose, there's somebody there to know what's going on and try to revive them, right? They're not going to report that. Those are statistics we'll never know about. There's even times where cops, firemen will go into homes after the fact. They'll find 2, 3, 4 Narcans. How long have they been there? That's an overdose statistic that we're never going to know about. And so these are only the overdoses that we know about. And like Josh said, You know, with heroin, 1 or 2 hits of Narcan, it was bringing everybody back. Narcan, 4 or 5, 8, they're still dying. And so anybody who's listening, if you think it's safe to use fentanyl because you have Narcan, you're fooling yourself. I mean, using fentanyl is like playing Russian roulette. Eventually, it's going to be the bullet. And that's exactly what it is. It's playing Russian roulette, and Narcan isn't going to bring everybody back.
I have a question about, you talked a little bit about how it's coming from Mexico, but can you talk a little bit about how it's actually entering the U.S.? Like, how do people get it in, and what does the face of those people look like? Are they Americans? Are they from Mexico?
So it's coming in every which way: boats, planes, drones, tunnels. I mentioned, I think earlier, it's not just the southern border now; it's up through Canada. In terms of the face of it, it's cartel associates in this country. I'd say statistically, speaking, probably more Americans are the ones actually bringing it in, but they're getting it from these Mexican cartels. I will say that there's a lot of pressure on the cartels right now for several different reasons. Obviously, we're not in a position where I'm going to say, we're getting a hold of the problem, but it's being addressed probably now more than ever. And so I don't want to leave, the room right now with everyone feeling hopeless. There's things that we can do as members of a local community to spread the word and to really hammer this home to individuals and our friends and neighbors. It's a global geopolitical foreign policy mess, so I don't want to sugarcoat it, but there is significant pressure on the cartels right now. But because it's so small and because it's so cheap, the incentives for the cartels are still there to try to get it through every which way. I mean, sometimes we seize at the border semi-trucks full of this stuff or methamphetamine. And that's a big, multi-million-dollar hit to the cartels, but they're just going to send another truck because that's their economic incentives. Like I think the officer was saying, it's an industry, and so we're treating it as such, but it can come in any number of ways.
So we talked about Michael Stabill. Michael Stabill, while we were investigating his death, about 2 weeks later, we had a murder that took place in Coeur d'Alene. Many of you probably remember it was on Memorial Day, I think 2021. And that case, that while us and Coeur d'Alene were investigating that murder, which was drug-related, that led us to the source, turned out to be the same source of pills for Michael Stabill, and that started a case that won national awards called Operation Red Road. Bryce was the prosecutor on that. That was, we tracked the source of those pills to an organization out of Western Washington. They were white kids, nobody over the age of 25, and they were going down to the border and getting bulk amounts, 20, 30, 40,000 pills at a time from cartel members and bringing it from the border in Arizona up into Washington and ultimately into Kootenai County, but also Alaska, North Carolina. They were shipping it all over the world. So that it is, the pills and the fentanyl are definitely coming from Mexico, but a lot of them are being transported from the border up here, which is honestly the smartest way to do it if you're the cartel, because you stand a bigger chance of getting caught once you're in as opposed to on that side. So.
I have a question about the prevalence of fentanyl use in human trafficking to purposely incapacitate victims. I came from college in Arizona, and I had people in Southern California tell me about how they heard stories of fentanyl was placed on anything like a toilet seat or a car handle, and then they were stalked until they like passed out and then human trafficked. I have not thankfully heard anything about that happening here, but I'm wondering if that is prevalent in our community or near our community.
Bryce can correct me. I don't think we've seen anything like that. I think with human smuggling down at the border, that's most often where this occurs, obviously getting people that want to migrate to our country without permission, across the border. Those people are taken advantage of in many different ways. So I can't speak to perhaps the incidents that you're talking about, down at the border. But I think it's important, like Captain Kemp said, I'm not aware of instances where people are physically touching something that has fentanyl on it and then they're having problems, right? Obviously, if you see a powder that's mysterious, you should stay clear. It could be any number of things that are problematic, but I haven't seen anything like that. So I'm not discounting that story down there, but we haven't seen that in this community as far as I'm aware, and I don't know.
I think it's absolutely, having worked human trafficking, sex trafficking, if you will, cases, it's absolutely an incentive for the men that are running these, mostly women and children, to get them addicted to a drug. And fentanyl is the perfect drug to get somebody addicted to, and we have absolutely seen that. I worked a case when I was in Pocatello, and they were using prostitutes to not only for prostitution, but also to sell back then black tar heroin and things like that. So it's your specific incidents about touching it and knocking somebody out. I haven't seen anything like that, certainly not up here.
A question here.
I really don't have a question. I just kind of want to tell you our story, but thank you to you guys for everything that you've done. Everything you talk about hits home with us. I'm going to try and get through this. I'll tell you our story about Cal. He graduated U of I, and he moved to Seattle. And he was living with his grandmother over there. And he was 1 week away from coming home to see us for Thanksgiving in 2019. Cal took a pill. He was not a drug addict. It was a blue pill, and it was laced with fentanyl. When he died, our house was full of family and friends. We did not know immediately how Cal passed away. They asked us if we wanted an autopsy on Cal, and after thinking about it for a little while, we decided yes, because we wanted to know why. We wear wristbands that say remember Cal, but more importantly, remember why. And fentanyl is why. And we want to spread that word, and we hope that everybody in this room will do the same when we leave here. But when we got the call from the coroner about the autopsy, they said it was fentanyl. We made a pact. This is my family right here. We made a pact when we walked out of that bedroom to tell all of our family and friends why Cal passed away. We put it in his obituary, and we have since then. My daughter has a website, Be That Friend, and we just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. And it's never easy for us to talk about, especially losing a child, but it's super important to us. We've been in this community for a year now. We came from a small town just 2 hours south of here. And everybody up here has been so welcoming, and we just appreciate that so much. But our story up here in the community really isn't that well known, so we're here expressing that, I guess. So we thank you for this, and we truly appreciate you guys doing this, so thank you.
Can you make sure that we connect after this?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much for sharing.
And thank you for being here. You got it? Yeah. Okay.
So, whether or not this is the last thing you hear, this is important to hear. There is a state law, and I'm going to paraphrase it for you, but basically, there's two parts to it. Talking about a good Samaritan, okay? If you are using drugs like fentanyl, and somebody you're using with overdoses, you can imagine the last person you want to call is 911, because when the cops show up and they find drugs, what's likely to happen? You're going to jail. Okay, and that's a big deterrent for a lot of people to call 911, and that's why a lot of people die. When people who use drugs together, okay, there's no loyalty there. They'll let you die because they don't want to get caught. Okay? There's a state law that says a person acting in good faith who seeks medical assistance for any person experiencing a drug-related medical emergency shall not be charged or prosecuted for possession of the drug, okay? So if I'm using drugs with Josh and Josh overdoses, I'm gonna be afraid to call the cops, because when the cops come and find the drugs, I'm gonna go to jail. And if I'm too busy worrying about that, Josh is gonna die and he's not gonna get help, right? That law prevents me from being charged if I'm calling to get Josh help while he's overdosing, okay? And then part 2 of this subsection is a person who experiences a drug-related medical emergency and is in need of medical assistance should not be charged or prosecuted for possession. So if I'm experiencing the medical emergency because I'm overdosing or I'm using, and I call the cops, or the cops stumble across me, I'm slumped behind the wheel, and while they're trying to save my life, they find pills, okay, I can't be charged with possession because I'm experiencing a medical emergency, okay? So that's important to know, because a lot of people are dying and overdosing because they're afraid to call 911. Okay, there is a law protecting people who are overdosing or calling on behalf of somebody who's overdosing from being charged with possessing the drugs. I think that's really important to know. Okay, so the law is designed to get people help. If there's any questions about that, let me know, but we felt that prudent to kind of discuss today. That's an Idaho law. I have no idea what Washington or Montana or anybody else is doing, okay?
And I thought it was important for us to look that up while we're sitting here, because as we're talking about these being in the schools, your kids are going to go to parties and something's going to happen. We've seen at the street level users of this law, something happens and the kids scatter. If they scatter and leave the child, you know, in the bathtub, on the floor, whatever, the chances of them dying are much higher, obviously, as you've heard, versus that one kid standing there and saying, I've got a 15-year-old daughter I've had this conversation with, call for help, because you're protected under this, but it's the right thing to do. And if we can teach our young people nothing more than call for help and give this child, this person, the best chance of survival, that's what we need to push out.
Yeah, so the question is, the plan with the fentanyl education project. Yes, the goal is it's a 4-year project, but the goal is to get into every middle school and high school in Idaho. And I'm not gonna be able to do that myself, and so we were just Sergeant Boardman and I were just talking about this. There's officers around the state. I know the U.S. Attorney's Office also has people that go and do these, and so we're going to have a sort of a big training and try and get as many people as instructors so that we can have officers, when we get a phone call to go to Post Falls or any of the middle schools, we can have somebody that can go do that, put it on the calendar, that sort of thing. So, yes.
So, is it going to work? Okay. Is this does it have to be done by an officer, or are you guys thinking about like training people in the schools already to reach more people?
Well, right now, the way that so we're working under the parameters of a grant, and we're partnered with the, I mean, I'm no longer an officer and I'll be doing these. We're partnered with a documentary filmmaker by the name of Dominic Tierno, who made a film called Dead on Arrival. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Dominic's an Idaho guy. And so he'll be one of the ones that are gonna do this. I'll give you my contact information, kind of maybe drill down on some of this, but yeah, so we need help, quite honestly, and we're not going to turn any help down. So.
One thing I'll say too is, look, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? We have to come at it from many different angles. So one thing that we're trying to develop with school districts down in the Boise area is a youth program where it's kind of like you're alluding to, train the trainers. So train the kids, because frankly, I have some kids of my own. They don't always listen to me, right? So if I show up in a school setting with my suit and my law enforcement partners, hopefully that message gets through to some kids, but it's not going to get through to every kid. But what's better is a peer-to-peer education. So that's something that we're developing as well, and I'm pretty optimistic about. It's been done actually in the Spokane area with some schools from North Idaho as well. So we're going to try to take some of the learning from that experience and develop an Idaho model that we can refine and then try to push out around the state in conjunction with what we're doing with John's team.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else from the audience have anything they'd like to ask? Nope. Here we go.
Yeah, one of the things we haven't talked about are the children who are left behind. My 33-year-old daughter died over a year ago from fentanyl overdose. And I have guardianship of my 9-year-old grandson. And he just sobbed on Saturday night because Mom wasn't going to be here for Mother's Day. And today is her birthday. She would have been 34. And so it's very difficult.
I'm really sorry for your loss. And I know we all are in this room. I think, the state, does have certain programs, for youth. Your grandson is very lucky to have you. I can tell that from just the two moments that you spoke. And I guess I would ask a question to the audience at this point. I mean, who, when we gathered, thought that we would hear from two families who've been directly impacted by that? I know I didn't expect that. I wasn't prepared for that, but I think that shows you, if we're to gather 60, 70 people from around the state, chances are there's going to be more than one family who's been directly impacted by fentanyl overdose. So I think, for all the great information that we've shared, I mean, that's the takeaway for me, you all, is that this is already, tearing families apart. And I'm very, very sorry to hear about the two families we've heard from today. I'm also awe-inspired by both of you for sharing your stories and for your willingness to think of other families and try to prevent other deaths. That's what it's all about. I know that your grandson's very fortunate to have you. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your loss. That's why we do this, like Stan and others have said. It's about saving lives. It's not about the stats. It's not about grants, funding for different agencies. It's not about who we get to work with. All that stuff, is important. But at the end of the day, it's about saving lives and making your community, our community, safer. It's a great place to live, as you all know. But this is a real challenge, and thank you both for speaking up and really inspiring us to keep fighting this fight.
I just wanted to share that there is a new fentanyl loss group that's going to be starting at 8:30. It's every other Monday, and it's put on by 2A.
And I think that's good information that we might be able to help.
Well, the Human Rights Education Institute, they
I think that's to segue into our next conversations, we're up against a kind of a hard stop at 5:30 tonight, unfortunately. The next conversation would be about other things we can do in treatment and other things that are happening in the community, and I think that's a critical part of it. So please come to the next one, and we can help share that message to other people. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight and sharing in this conversation. Thank you very much to Josh and Stanley and Jeremy and John and Sam, and look forward to getting the message out on this important topic. So thank you very much.